here in defiance of tyranny. You've come to fight as free men. And free men you are. What will you do without freedom? Will you fight? Fight against that? No! We will run. And we will live. Aye. Fight and you may die. Run and you'll live. At least a while. And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
You ready? Let's go. Yeah. For those of you that want to know what we're all about, it's like this, y'all.
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. Okay, one thing I want to start off with today is Justina Pelletier, the whole case surrounding her. We have one here that was posted an hour ago by Kristen Tate at benswan.com. Massachusetts breaks silence about Justina Pelletier drops gag order against father. benswan.com has been closely following the story of 15-year-old Justina Pelletier, who has been in the custody of Boston Children's Hospital for over 1 year against her parents' will. Earlier today, the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families broke its silence on what is now a highly publicized case. Earlier this week, a Suffolk County judge ruled that Justina be moved out of a medical facility and put into a foster home. Justina's parents, Lou and Linda, have been fighting to get their daughter back home ever since the hospital initially took custody of her last February. Years ago, doctors diagnosed Justina with mitochondrial disease, which causes loss of muscle control. Despite the diagnosis, Justina was able to live a happy and relatively normal life with her family in Connecticut. During a visit to Boston Children's Hospital during February 2013, doctors claimed that the teen has somatoform disorder, not mitochondrial disease. Somatoform disorder is a mental disorder, not a physical one, like mitochondrial disease. The hospital ordered that Justina be taken off all her mitochondrial and pain medication. Lou and Linda did not think this was the best plan of action and wanted to bring their daughter home. Officials would not allow that. The parents were subsequently escorted out of the hospital by security personnel. Only 4 days later, they found out that they lost custody of their daughter due to both parents resisting towards recommended treatment plans and over-medicalizing the girl. They remain heartbroken and furious. And in reality, it was the Boston Children's Hospital and the doctors that were involved in this. They were the ones that were over-medicalizing the girl, because her treatment was helping her and successful, and once they took hold, they basically started killing her. It says here, Lou and Linda were both incredibly emotional following the hearing this week. Today, the state spoke out on Justina's situation. Lost my spot here. Give me a second. Okay. Massachusetts DCF spokesman Alec Loftus said, "Our primary goal has always been the health and well-being of Justina." Well, that would be a lie, because you wouldn't have her in a situation that's killing her when she wasn't dying before. We want the parents to be able to work with the providers and courts to ultimately move Justina back to her home state of Connecticut. That is the objective and is consistent with our previous efforts to find an appropriate placement near her home. What? No, you weren't. You were trying to keep her in Boston. A medical team has been identified at Tufts, which is where they wanted to take her in the first place. The whole reason they lost custody of her, because they wanted to take her back home and take her back to Tufts. And it says here, the family provider of choice with the clinical expertise to care for Justina. Then why didn't you let her let her parents take her back to Tufts in the first place? That is what this was all over. They went to Boston Children's Hospital because there was a Tufts doctor now working with Boston Children's Hospital, and they were going to see him, which he never got to end up seeing his patient because these lunatic people trying to prove theories come out of nowhere and ambush the parents. And when the parents decide, oh, well, we don't think this is going to work out, we're going to take her back home and take her back to Tufts. Oh no. Escort them out. Then they find out they lose custody of their kid. But now, oh yeah, we've been trying to do this the whole, no you haven't. You've been fighting against this the whole time. Pretty sick. So apparently it says here, while this sounds like positive news for Lou and Linda, the parents are not very hopeful. Lou told The Blaze, they have thrown more carrots out there over the last 13 months, dangling, teasing us, and that's the cruelest thing you can do, he claimed. The state has made several broken promises regarding the Justina's custody in the past. Actions speak louder than words, he said. On the bright side, however, there will no longer be a March 24 hearing to determine whether or not Lou violated the judge's gag order when he spoke out to the media earlier this month. The motion to hold him in contempt of court was dropped. The next court hearing when Justina's custody status will be further discussed is set for March 17th. Which is still complete BS. And again, Ben Swan, The Blaze, and a few other outlets are really keeping up to date, and I'll keep you guys up to date on everything that takes place in this whole matter. Again, hashtag Free Justina. Spread all these articles from benswan.com, The Blaze, and keep the pressure on them because this matter is still not over. Not close. Okay, I don't know how many of you might have Netflix or anything. I don't tend to watch regular TV. I might catch something on Netflix, and one of those on Netflix is that House of Cards, and pretty interesting. It's one of those things you're like watching it going, I don't doubt it at all. But you know, again, because it's a movie, you can kind of, you know, get into it or it's more of a series, but you know, you get the drift. You don't take it too seriously, but you can go, well, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt that they do that. And I honestly don't think it goes far enough. I've seen, give me a second here. Okay. I really don't think it goes far enough to show what really goes on. It doesn't really tug at the heart, of Washington and what rules. Oh, excuse me here. It just doesn't really get down to the basis of, what's running the country, what it's all about. But it really does kind of show a basic corruption and, what does it mean? It's one of those things I really don't know. But Stefan Molyneux, had something to say. This one I, have the audio for it. I do have a few other clips I want to try to play from YouTube later on in the broadcast, but this one, since it was the one I want to start you off with, I went ahead and got the audio for it. So let me cue this up here. Okay, here we go. And this one is titled House of Cards, What They Aren't Telling You.
Hi everybody, Stefan Molyneux from Freedomain Radio. Hope you're doing well. So, this is a review of House of Cards, Netflix original series, starring the sinister and fairly reptilian Kevin Spacey, upgrading his career from playing a grasshopper in A Bug's Life. And I'm going to make a case that this is cause for enormous optimism in the ongoing drama of human liberation. So if you look at the history of how government is portrayed, then you see that this is really a sea change. There was a lot of heroism in 19th century politics, and there was a lot of heroism all the way up to the mid-20th century in politics. If you think of sort of the towering giants of Benjamin Disraeli and Woodrow Wilson and not so much Coolidge, I guess, FDR, Churchill, and so on, there has been this hero worship of the giant men of history, generally men, and that has really come crumbling down. I would argue it's really come crumbling down since the 70s, but in particular with House of Cards, we are really starting to see naked force for what it is. If you think of a movie like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where a nice guy goes to Washington to get some funding for a Boy Scout camp and cleans up the whole place, almost against his will, that was the wild optimism matched really only by the truly cavity-inducing saccharine optimism of Aaron Sorkin's West Wing series. But now we've seen a joining together in House of Cards. We've seen a joining together of two genres of movie making, of storytelling. And I would argue these genres have always been the same, but here we see them coming together for the first time, which is the mob movie and the government movie. And this is really fantastic for those of us who are trying to illuminate the general population as to something which used to be well understood. As George Washington said, government is not eloquence, it is force, pure and simple. As Mao said, political power flows out of the barrel of a gun. As one of the Nazi leaders said, whenever I hear the word culture, I take off the safety on my revolver. And in House of Cards, Francis, the vice president, there'll be a few spoilers in here, sorry for that. But in House of Cards, Francis, when talking to a man worth over $40 billion, says, I don't care how much money you've got. I have all the men with guns. And that is a very powerful statement to be made, that money interests are fundamentally subjugated to political interests. Everyone says, oh, corporations run the government and so on. But the truth is the government does have the men with the guns and the corporations in general don't. And where they do, like Blackwater, and like some quasi-private but really fascistic prisons, what they have is money being flowed to them by the state, who is taking it from people at gunpoint or stealing it from people who aren't even born yet in the form of national debt. So one of the things that I think is underappreciated culturally is the degree to which we became completely fascinated by mobster films in the 1970s. Before that, there were mobsters, sort of the Edward G. Robinson kind of characters, but they were always the bad guys. There was no sympathy, no fascination. There was a complete moral condemnation. Part of that was the movie maker's code, but also part of it was just the audience demand for that kind of resolution of a story. Bad guys got shot and good guys got ticker tape parades and so on. Now, in the 70s, you could really argue, starting with Scorsese's Mean Streets, but definitely with The Godfather and just about every other mob film thereafter, from Goodfellas to The Sopranos and so on. What you have is a morally neutral exploration, and in sometimes, even with Brando's character, Don Corleone in The Godfather, a sympathetic character. Brando, for the rest of his life, every time he'd go to an Italian restaurant, he would be unable to pay because they'd always want to give him free meals because they felt he depicted this mobster so benevolently and sympathetically that they loved the guy. I mean, that's quite wild. Can you imagine going to Germany and having restaurants give you free meals because you effectively portrayed Hitler in a sympathetic way? It wouldn't happen, right? So why did mob movies become so powerful, such a powerful genre in the 1970s, sympathetic mob movies? Well, I would argue it's because there is two kinds of organized crime, or two kinds of mobs in the world. There is what is called organized crime, the mafia and so on. And then there's disorganized crime, which is the government. Both of them use force to get what they want. And one of the things that's really interesting is right after, in the West, we took this radical experiment, particularly in the 1960s, of giving more and more and more power to governments, of willing to slide ourselves under the jackboot heel of government power, which we had spent hundreds of years fighting to get out from under. We slid back under for fear of enemies, foreign and domestic, for a desire to end poverty, for a desire to educate the ignorant, for a desire to heal the sick, and so on. We handed all this power, which we'd spent hundreds of years fighting our way out from under, we handed all this power back to government. This was characterized by Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs, the welfare warfare state, right? So the government is supposed to take care of the sick and the poor and the needy and single moms and all that kind of stuff. So we gave all this power to government, and then we became fascinated by mob movies. I don't think that's a coincidence at all. The people who grew up in the 70s, who were the movie-going audience, the people who grew up in the 50s and 60s, who were the movie-going audience of the 70s, movie-goers tend to be younger people. In the 1960s in America, it became illegal to fire teachers. And teachers' unions and government unions of every kind began to really get their stranglehold on the economy. And, of course, unions, particularly public sector unions, are heavily associated with the mob. So children were raised by teachers protected by mob interests and whose economic interests were advanced by mob interests, and who, the Jimmy Hoffa stuff, people regularly saw the mob union connection, particularly in the public sector, because there's not that same driver of profits to minimize the negative economic effects of coercion. So you have a whole generation of people raised by teachers, protected by, and whose economic interests are advanced by mob interests to a large degree. And naturally, they turn more and more power over to the state. The state has to be viewed as benevolent in order for us to give all this power to the state, to have it, heal the sick and feed the hungry and so on. We have to view the state as a benevolent power. But we all know deep down, this is not any kind of secret. We all know deep down that the government is an agency of coercion. And we had turned to an agency of coercion to solve all of our problems, to take all of our money, to sell off and educate our children, and to auction off our hopes, dreams, and futures to well-connected foreign banksters. So we basically had switched to not government as a dangerous servant and a fearful master who must perpetually be restrained lest it break the bonds of the Constitution, wrap its many-tentacled proboscis around our neck, and suck our blood dry. we turned to it as an agency of salvation. Violence became something that we thought could be used to achieve good. And then the next thing you know, we are sympathetic to mob bosses in mob movies. This is an unconscious affinity, right? And it's actually quite clear in The Godfather. Al Pacino's, I think it's Diane Keaton, says to him, like, congressmen don't get people killed. And he said, now who's being naive? Right? So basically the mafia has always looked at politicians as better mafia, as better at being, at taking things, at being on the right side of the law. Just as people in gangs view the military as a really good gang, which is why they regularly go into the military and now infiltrated almost all aspects of the U.S. military. They go into the military to learn how to shoot and how to kill so they can take that back to the streets and continue to wage the drug war more effectively. So mob bosses look at politicians as better mob bosses, and street fighters and hitmen look at the military as better street fighters and hitmen, with good reason. And so our fascination with mob movies, I believe, has a lot to do with our understanding that we have surrendered virtue to violence. But we couldn't make that connection very clearly because it was very scary for us to say, oh, look, we just turned our entire futures and our freedoms over to a bunch of sociopaths in suits who shape nice language and carve us into tiny, tasteable, delectable, consumable morsels of financial assets. And we are used fundamentally as tax livestock. Our productivity is used as collateral to borrow, to bribe us and pass the bill forward. And there is this wretched aspect to the state of coercion and counterfeiting and bribery. And, this is the reason why the approval of Congress is at about 6% or so. Now, as a reaction to all of this, there's a splitting, right? Splitting is a phenomenon where you take one person and you then turn them into good and bad. When my mom was in a good mood, she was great, but then when she was in a bad mood, she was really bad. Or my husband who beats me when he's not beating me, he's sweet and angelic and so on, but then something comes over, something takes over, right? So you split. And so what people on the left did, and the left generally run Hollywood and the media, what people on the left did was they said, okay, well, there's the good guys called the Democrats and the bad guys called the Republicans, who are racist and reactionary and angry that minorities are coming into the country and gripping their guns and their Bibles. And they had this whole narrative which came out in a lot of movies and TV shows and so on. Like The West Wing, they were all Democrats, and they were all noble and heroic and virtuous and struggling to do the best and the right thing, but they were frustrated, don't you see, by those goddamn Republicans, and this is why virtue could not be achieved, because there were too many people opposed to the exercise of virtue in government. Well, nobody really believes that anymore. This has all become silly nonsense. I mean, the Democrats, in order to shore up their defense credentials, have become warmongers, and the Republicans, in order to shore up their social compassion credentials, have become full welfare status. I mean, the Republicans no longer challenge social security or the welfare state or unemployment or Medicare or Medicaid or any of those things on the principle that they violate freedom, they violate individuality, and they require the initiation of the use of force. And the people on the left don't really oppose military spending that much and are not going full tilt boogie against the war on drugs and so on. So they've really become two sides of the same coin, the bichromatic rainbow of choice that you're presented with in every election. And this comes out, and I know that House of Cards has its origins in British novels and British drama, I think. But it's the same kind of thing over there. So now what we see is the union of politics and mob movies, of political movies and mob movies, wherein politics is viewed in the same lens and through the same machinations as a mob movie. With the difference being that the violence all occurs off screen. You don't see people not paying their taxes being dragged off to jail. You don't see people with a joint in their handbag being dragged off to jail. And you certainly don't see any bombs falling on foreigners. What has occurred, and this is why it's still very hard for people to sort of get and to grasp this and to understand this. There are 2 murders, if I remember rightly, in House of Cards committed by the vice president. And there are 2 white people. One he asphyxiates in a car. The other he tosses in front of a train in a really kind of a cartoony and silly way. And this is supposed to be horrifying, of course, right? Because why? Because they're white people, because they're politicians, because they speak English. The fact that these people are organizing drone strikes and wars around the world and torturing people overseas, shipping people off to extraordinary rendition camps or torture camps and so on, that can't be talked about. And there's no mention in House of Cards of a war. And you could say, well, this is to make sure that it stays relevant even after the war's over and so on. But the reality is that that's where most of the death occurs, that these people order. There's no mention of prisons, that America with like 5% of the world's population has 25% of the world's prisoners and so on. So you have these kind of cartoony murders, which is supposed to make us horrified, but the murders that occur as a result of foreign policy in the U.S. has been estimated to be responsible for between 15 and 20 plus million deaths through its foreign policy since the Second World War. Well, that's a little bit more than a hit on a fellow politician or a hit on a meddlesome reporter. The real murder occurs overseas and generally among the underclasses domestically, but that's not portrayed because, again, we're still inching our way towards an emotional understanding of the degree to which we have surrendered our freedoms to, the flag-wrapped mob called the state. What is interesting as well is that it's a child-free universe. Most politicians have children. And I don't remember seeing a single child. Children are sort of mentioned. The president mentions all my kids are going through a tough time and all of that. But children aren't there, present at all. They're never talked about in terms of policy and they're never present on screen. And that's, pretty terrible. So there's one of the reasons it stays entertaining is you kind of view these people as, sociopaths playing with sociopaths, right? Evil playing with evil, manipulators playing with manipulators. There's a voluntary aspect, like you could leave public life, you could go and be a librarian or something like that. And the fact that they're all playing with each other makes it more entertaining. If we saw them being brutal with their children, it would be quite a different matter. I mean, the vast majority of politicians spank their children. You never see that on screen. But why not? If violence is a great way to solve social problems through the power of the state, violence must be a great way to solve child-raising problems through the power of the open hand or the fist. And it is interesting also that one of the ways in which society has, dare I say it, elevated itself is that in the past, if you challenged the king would just have you killed. There'd be this Macbeth moment where Macbeth kills King Duncan and so on. And now there's just this endless harassment. You get subpoenaed, you have to go and testify, and they talk about the president and the vice president going to jail. All of that is complete nonsense. I mean, politicians don't go to jail. I mean, one of the reasons you become a politician is so that you never really have to go to jail. And so there's no longer, in general, outright murder of opponents. There's just this kind of harassment, this kind of wearing you down, this kind of feeding things to the media so that you get embarrassed and all that kind of stuff. And that's a step forward, but it does also indicate another central aspect of House of Cards, which is the degree to which none of these human monsters in power care at all about morality. There's a great line where this woman says to the vice president, you're just one step shy of treason. And he says, yes, therefore politics, right? What's that old great quote? Treason doth never prosper. What's the reason? Why, if it prosper, none dare call it treason. If you win, you ain't treasonous. It's only if you lose and you're treasonous. If you win, you're the new king and so on, right? So they don't care about moral standards at all. When the president's wife reveals to, like internally to the political party that she's had more than one abortion, they don't care. They just care about public perception, right? When an affair comes up, nobody cares that she has an affair. What they care about is that the public cares that she has an affair. So it's very interesting the degree to which these monsters completely and totally understand ethics and the power of ethics, and how the public's addiction to moralizing renders them susceptible to this kind of manipulation. Oh, she had an affair. What a terrible person. I mean, the president basically gets impeached because he and his wife were is threatened with impeachment because he and his wife are going to therapy. In other words, they promote a 2-time direct murderer to the presidency in the form of the vice president because the president went to therapy. I mean, talk about having your values, I guess charitably you could say, misaligned, I think is pretty important. I mean, what's the harm in going to therapy? Therapy is very beneficial versus, killing 2 people and being a general lizard-eyed, sleepy-toed sociopath. There is a fantastic amount of power that goes on. Like there's one woman's father is being prosecuted in another country. The vice president says with one phone call, I can get the charges dropped. I mean, what an astounding amount of power. And that is, I think, very, very true. Now, the other thing that's interesting as well, which you don't see, you saw a little bit of it in, I think, season 3 of The Wire, when they were talking about running for the mayoral office. Recently a Democratic mandate has gone out in the Democratic Party that candidates need to spend 5 hours a day fundraising. I mean, this is what you pay them to do, is to get people who are willing to bribe them with your money. That's how this old idea that Congress people should have stickers like NASCAR cars. They should have stickers all over them of who's funded them. But you wouldn't be able to see them. It'd be this big giant ball of paper like Robert De Niro in Brazil. And you don't see any fundraising at all. But of course that's a major part of what people do. This begging and cringing and pleading, for money and promising and bribing. And I mean, it's just this massive tsunami of money that just goes back and forth through the political process. But you don't really see that at all, because that's just kind of mundane, but that's a fundamental part of what they're doing. It would be fascinating to see that, I think, to see the fundraising. You saw it in season 3 of The Wire, but what you didn't see was why people gave the guy money. You see him on the phone saying, give me money, give me money, give me money. But money buys access, access buys preferential legislation, which is profitable for your business, and that's why you give money to politicians. If you're well connected, that's why you give money to politicians. People just worried about, slush funds and super PACs and so on, while there's wars and incarcerations and so on, people getting their doors kicked in, the wrong doors kicked in sometimes in the war on drugs and having people shot by accident and so on. You only ever really see fundamentally trade disputes or warship maneuvering. There's no war, and there's no real focus on spending, on the need to control spending or the need to even limit the growth of spending. And it is fascinating, at least to me, just sort of last point that I'll make, is that we are now very close to understanding that the government is the mob that wins, right? So historically we know this with the aristocracy, right? The aristocracy were the best murderers, right? The people who could kill the most with the least conscience. Political power always concentrates those with the least conscience at the top. Like you hear all these stories about, some guy just got released and got a couple of $1 million, I think, in New York State after serving 20 plus years after being framed by a cop. Well, to frame someone and have that person rot in jail while you go on with your life means that you're missing like the 12 or 13 complex centers of empathy that need to be developed in the brain for you to be a vaguely decent human being. I mean, if I did something horrendous like that, I would be unable to sleep. In my mind's eye, this guy pacing back and forth in his cell with his life destroyed would be burning in my brain, and I wouldn't be able to take it. But these people can, right? They could just pass laws, throw people in jail. They don't look twice. Some other journalist gets basically threatened with 35 years of jail, and they're like, well, he's out of the equation. And this is all par for the course. You can't exercise violent power if you have empathy. Like, you can't shoot people if you have empathy. You can't spank your children if you have empathy. You can't advocate for violent solutions like political laws for complex social problems if you have empathy. I mean, fundamentally, you can't cheer for your sports team if you have empathy. Because you just happen to be on the other side of town. I mean, I got this when I was about 4 or 5 years old. Some West Ham United kid came up to me and said, my team rocks and your team, which was Crystal Palace, sucks. And I'm like, yeah, but you just born there. I'm born here. What's it got to do with me? I mean, maybe this team sucks and that team doesn't suck. It's not like you've earned anything. It's not like I haven't earned something. You're just born there and I'm born here. Like, if you have empathy, then these artificial divisions of us versus them and my team good and that team bad and so on, like when your team scores a touchdown, you cheer, and the other team supporters are sad, and if their team scores a touchdown, you feel sad if they cheer. I mean, it's just pathetic. It's so anti-empathetic. And of course, sports is a lot around training people out of empathy for geographical proximity, i.e. countries. And, okay, so one more quick point, which is, there's this fella named Tusk who's worth a huge amount of money, and he basically gets batted back and forth. This is the fundamental thing people don't understand about the relationship between business and the state. The state has the people with guns, the business people don't. The vice president can get this guy arrested. He can't get the vice president arrested. This is foundational to understanding the relationship between the state and business. Business leaders have a fiduciary and legal responsibility to maximize profits. If they can maximize profits by using the power of the state and they don't, they can get sued and go to jail, and they certainly will get removed from their position. So having the state around in the business arena is exactly the same as having performance-enhancing drugs legal in the sports arena. I mean, you're not going to win if you don't use these performance-enhancing drugs. You're just not going to win. And so you have to use them in order to win. And if you say, well, I'm never going to use them, you just get drummed out, the second day of training. And, don't hate the player, hate the game, I think is a pretty important thing. Tusk is batted back and forth. All he's got is eloquence and some money. They all have the guns. And any businessman or businesswoman who doesn't use the power of the state can go to jail for that, and certainly will never retain their position. And it is really the profit-enhancing drug called the state that needs to be called into question. So I would recommend watch the show with an open with open eyes. You are watching the awakening of the recognition that the state is just another mob. And when we surrendered ourselves to the flag, we really were just surrendering ourselves to guys in cheap, shiny suits with bad hair, pimply wives, and blood on their hands.
Well, there you go. But, one thing I want to emphasize that he said was, these are people with the guns. You really have to hate the game. You can't go, well, these people are using this power. Why does this power exist? It exists because the people allow it to exist. Fighting that type of power is not a overnight task. And to go, well, that person's not fighting the system the way I believe they should fight the system. They're going about it a different way. I don't like that. Okay. But don't hate them for going the path that they take. If they're fighting for liberty, and whatever path they take to try to fight that, allow them to take that path. As long as you don't have to support them, but you don't have to hate on them if they're not out there being violent people. It's a pretty simple thing that you can agree to disagree. And, just fight the system, stop fighting each other. It's one of those things I talk about a lot. And it's the divide and conquer. You can have different opinions than me, and that's fine. But if you want to inner fight, I just don't have time for that. I'm worried about fighting the system. There's a lot of different steps you can take to fight the system. There's some people out there that are, I'm complete sovereign, and I do not even care what laws are. I don't harm people. I live more like a mountain man, but, there's people out there that are trying to set up anarchy communities, based on volunteers, ideology, libertarian ideology. There's a lot of different things that people are doing. Now, if people are going to attack me, I'm basically going to call them out and say, listen, you have your path, I have my path. But if you want to fight me, you can go ahead, but I'm going to fight the system. People are like, well, you gotta defend yourself. Listen, you know, I'm not going to sit here and fight 3 different fronts. You know, my focus is speaking the truth as I know it and fighting for liberty, for freedom, and that's my main goal. I could go after other hosts, or I could go after other networks, or I could go after other websites, and all that does is feed into what they want. I can, you know, pick apart stories, and people can pick apart my stories and my opinions and their opinions. The whole time, guess what? They're running over you like they're a steamroller, and you're just some hot pavement to roll over. They do. And I see more and more of it. And I really seen this start breaking out right after the last Republican primaries for, presidential run, when Ron Paul, lost to Mitt Romney, when he really, in reality, probably would have won. If it wasn't for the corruption at state levels and at the national level, he probably would have won. But that's when I watched this division, and I was like, okay, you know, people have different ideas of where we should go from here. That's awesome. And then I slowly watched people start attacking each other. Oh, we should go this direction. Oh, we should go. Guess what? They won. You're fighting each other. Divide and conquer, checked off their list. And I think the divide and conquer, unless we can defeat that, guess what? We're never going to win against them. Never. Because they will have you fighting each other. They rather you be Hatfields and McCoys than come after them. And guess what? You go all Hatfield and McCoy on each other, guess what they're coming after next? What are they already trying to come after? What do we see going on in Connecticut right now? What have we seen go on in New York? Taking people's guns away. They want you to lose it. They want you to fight each other. They'd rather have a civil war than a revolution. Okay, I'm going to see if this will work. I don't know if it will, but we are going to attempt it. This one is Naomi Wolf and Edward Snowden, and it's Revolution and Becoming Pro-Second Amendment. And this one is from We Are Change, and hopefully this will play here. You guys in the chat are going to have to let me know if this plays or if it just goes completely silent. And here we go, I think. Maybe. Commercial played, now is a video going to play. Okay. Let's see if we can do this again. I've been having a lot of problems. since I've been trying to, update everything because we've been having, problems with the audio not wanting to play through the soundboard. Now I have a problem with any of my, browsers wanting to stay operational. I updated, which I don't like to do. I usually like to keep everything, but they usually eventually force you into an update. So I'm thinking, okay, it's about time that I do update this stuff because now I can't get audio to play through my soundboard into the UCY network. So, I'm gonna update this stuff, and yeah, I might have messed up there. It's one of those things. That's exactly why I hate updating. And you go through and you're like, okay, is there any patches out there? Okay, there's no patches, or all my patches are up to date. Now what? Hopefully this will work. We're hoping. And I will launch my chat back open. I actually might have to sign in to get this to even work. And this is also exactly why I downloaded the audio for the first one. And I had a problem getting that to want to download, so it took me a minute and got that downloaded. I never even got around to downloading anything else. Okay, let's try this one more time. And I'm going to open the chat room back up so I can see if this is actually feeding through. But here we go.
First of all, they were really tough on you in there, and I think you handled yourself very well. I really appreciate what you said about not being utopian and not just concentrating on what we're against. But overall, what are your thoughts on libertarianism?
Oh, well, I actually don't think I had an argument with libertarianism tonight, because I pretty much support most libertarian perspectives I've heard. I mean, I might not support their policy outcomes, like I believe in zoning, for instance, but I support the philosophy behind them. And a lot of the actual policy outcomes I do support. So I guess I want to really acknowledge how not fully educated I am. I was given a lot of really important reading lists by people tonight, and they know a lot of things I don't. So I need to learn more about what the many strains of libertarianism there were in the room. I think that I am learning that there is anarcho-capitalism here and certain strains of anarchism that I don't fully understand yet, and that's why I pushed to learn. How can I put it? I mean, as I said earlier, I think we all have to really hammer out the revolution and have a real program, whatever you are, Marxist, an environmentalist, a green, whatever, right-wing, left-wing, Tea Party, we really need citizens to be, I would say legislators, but everyone here hates the law, so citizens have to not just say what they're against, they have to build what they're for. So that's what I was pushing for.
I think what I really appreciate about you, you're not stuck in your ways, you're willing to change your mind, and you mentioned on stage how you changed your mind on the Second Amendment. Would you mind telling us what factors led you to make that decision?
Sure, although I hope I won't be arrested. So as I said earlier, I was raised in a demographic that always hates guns and always thinks that there should be no access to guns. But I do believe, the United States is now assassinating American citizens without due process and is kind of declared war on American citizens. And this was exactly the situation the founders faced with, King George declaring war essentially on a colony. And so that's why they have the Second Amendment. And I think that I hate gun violence, but I recognize that when the state is declaring its intention to be able to assassinate you, you need to be able to protect yourself.
I mean, it's rightfully understandable. I mean, I grew up around gun violence in New York City, and I actually came to the same conclusion a couple of years ago. It only makes sense. But last topic I wanted to bring up, you raised some concerns before about Edward Snowden. I was wondering what made you bring that up, and if you still have any concerns.
I'm glad you brought that up. I did. I did write a blog post. I was concerned about who he was and what his intentions were because he seemed so polished. Yeah. And no whistleblower I know of or activist is that organized when it comes to the media. And I was worried that the instigation or that the outcome was just propagandized that we're all under surveillance and deal with it and get used to it. And, I've now talked to Jesselyn Raddick here tonight, and she represents Edward Snowden, and she represents that he's a real person who is really motivated by altruism, and I trust her judgment, and she's working with him, and I know her to be a really very great patriot and a person of a lot of integrity. So I think nobody can know. That's what I said earlier. We all need to verify and learn more and ask questions, but I don't have I wasn't raising final questions, and I don't have a final conclusion, but I'm adding the evidence that his lawyer, whom I respect, represents him as a serious whistleblower.
Yeah, that's definitely the way to go, is always to have an open mind, always question everything. Last thing, if you don't mind, you listed 50 solutions in one of your books. What's your top one solution that you would suggest to everyone? I know it's a very hard question.
No. Well, here it's pretty easy. We've got to get rid of the Patriot Act and everything else, and NDAA and everything else follows from that. But, as I said before, looking at societies that reclaimed democracies, they always used protest and First Amendment assembly. And so it's very important for us to get rid of this militarization of our police forces, pass laws to make sure that you can't give military equipment to local police forces, and penalize violent treatment of protesters and regain our First Amendment freedom of assembly rights.
Thank you so much for your open mind and your beautiful speech and your books. Really appreciate you.
We are Change on YouTube, so go there, find them. And, one thing she said during the Second Amendment question, when government starts assassinating American citizens, they have a right to protect themselves. That's what the Second Amendment, one of the reasons why it was put there. Simple self-defense against tyrants of any kind, whether it be a robber or a thief, a rapist, murderer of any type. Sorry. It's one of those things that you have to look at it and go, if they're able to murder you and then willing to take your guns away, then there's evidently a problem. And what if you get a tyrant from the other side? These people that are out there supporting these tyrannical measures that the administration has taken. What happens when the establishment Republicans get in charge? Then they can attack the left little guy. And now they have all these executive powers that weren't there before. It's one of those things that by now a lot of people understand there is one party. most of the people that listen to this broadcast are, you know, well versed in, we have one party, we have control. Control versus freedom. And the people are the only one cheering for freedom, while the politicians and the establishment and the status quo are sticking with more control, more government. And it's really a fight for freedom. This truly is a fight for freedom. And just look at the past 10 years. Think about 10 years ago when you would go on the internet looking for some type of alternative, liberty-minded broadcast that wasn't something mainstream. There weren't, you know, thousands and thousands of choices. Now there is. You know, people might think, oh, these people are out there just trying to make money. No. There's too many of us out there to be just cashing in. It's the people that continue to fight for it, the people that stick to what they say they believe in. They show their character that they're going to stick through it, no matter how tough things get. Those are the people that will probably become successful because they have the passion, they have the drive, they have the ambition, they have a belief in something greater than governmental control over your life. We should have phones set. 718-717-8296. Feel free to call in if you want to discuss anything we've gone over so far. If you want to add anything, you can go ahead and call in too. 718-717-8296. There was a new one, from Ben Swan. Hopefully I can find it here. That I really wanted to play. Now that I know here it is. This is about John Paul Stevens and him wanting to rewrite the Second Amendment. This kind of ties in to what we just heard about. Well, you know, she became pro-Second Amendment because she realized how tyrannical the government is getting. You know, one was a 16-year-old kid that did nothing. Oh, he was collateral. Yeah, okay, you targeted him. Okay, he wasn't collateral damage. It's just, I think we're being manipulated, or, well, some people are being manipulated. But here we go. Hopefully this works. And this is from Ben Swan again.
A former Supreme Court justice believes that the wording of the Second Amendment needs to be changed to reflect changing times. I'm Ben Swan with your Truth in Media moment. Thanks for watching. John Paul Stevens retired in 2010 after serving as an Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court for 35 years. Well, now he wants to make a few changes to the Second Amendment. In his new book, 6 Amendments, How and Why We Should Change the Constitution, Stevens proposes different wording for the Second Amendment that would drastically change its meaning. The Second Amendment currently says, quote, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed," end quote. Now, Stevens wants to change the wording of the Second Amendment to this: "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms when serving in a militia shall not be infringed." He argues that the change is necessary to reflect changing times and that the Founding Fathers did not write the Second Amendment to protect the right to personal self-defense. He wrote, quote, "Emotional claims that the right to possess deadly weapons is so important that it's protected by the federal constitution distort intelligent debate about the wisdom of particular aspects of proposed legislation designed to minimize the slaughter caused by the prevalence of guns in private hands," end quote. Okay, so in short, Stevens wants to say that there is no right to firearms, no right to self-protection with a gun. What Stevens is actually attempting to do is claim that the right to own a firearm is only for certain groups. But the founders and framers absolutely did not see it that way. Does John Paul Stevens actually believe that the founders and framers did not believe in a right to personal self-defense? That's almost laughable. How about any of the other 9 amendments that make up our Bill of Rights? The right to speech. Is that personal speech? Religion. Personal religion? Due process. Every right in the Bill of Rights is about personal rights. None of them are meant to protect the corporate over the individual. Not one. The founders absolutely believed in the right to defend oneself by matching force with others. And what's more, they believed it was a natural right and therefore shall not and cannot be infringed. Be sure to check out all of the stories that affect your liberty online at benswan.com, where humanity is greater than politics.
Okay. One thing he didn't touch on. When they say militia, too, you have to understand their belief back then. Back then, when they would say militia, well, what they considered the militia was every able-bodied person that was able to defend property from invaders. Whether it be a robber or a invading, foreign government. That was the militia. Actually, I have right here the Indiana State Constitution, Article 12, Section 1. A militia shall be provided and shall consist of all persons over the age of 17 years, except for those persons who may be exempt by laws of the United States or of this state, basically criminals. The militia may be divided into active or inactive classes and consist of such military organizations as may be provided by law. And then you can, that's as of amended, November 3rd, 1936 and November 5th of 1974. And I've been trying to find the old one, which they've, of course, have hidden. Now they tried to call the militia your local National Guard, which is a fallacy because the local National Guard, even though they go, well, it's under the control of your governor, can basically be taken control of by the military. Basically, in a martial law scenario, if they wanted to, the military could override the governor at any time and take control of the National Guard, which is against what the militias initially were supposed to be. And a lot of people say that was destroyed because of what happened with the Civil War. So that's where militias died off and became, and what someone actually said in the chat room, militia is now a dirty word. And that's exactly what they did. They said, the militias became, the National Guard, and then, militia groups that were trying to stay militia or were, those were bad people. And, nowadays they try to make them out to be, homegrown terrorists. And, they're, most that I've ever seen weren't that type of people. They were definitely, decent people. Now, I've seen stuff online where I've seen some that are definitely more of a radical, but those are the ones they want you to see. That's why I see them online. Those are the ones that make their rounds. But, you know, we just have a complete lack of understanding in our populace of what a government that works for the people was supposed to be like, because too many people have given up their freedoms for this fallacy of safety. And what that does is it just leads to a cycle where they keep needing more government because they're under that illusion that government will help them. Therefore, they ask for more government, things get worse. They need more government, things get worse. They need more government. It's one of those, you know, addictions. You really look at it, that's what it is. Just need more and more and more. Can't get enough of it because it never actually satisfies you, because that's not what it's there to do. And that's where the disconnect comes from. Okay. Give me a second here. Once I find the channel I'm looking for, which it should be right here. That should be Pigmine 5. I swear I keep subscribing to Pigmine 5. And I think it keeps unsubscribing me. Because, again, it doesn't show me subscribed. I subscribe. I should. I think they're playing with my head here. But Obama warns Russia of costs in Ukraine. And I was glad he got this posted because I didn't want to have to try to pull it from one of these slow loading websites, and I'm glad my audio is playing through my soundboard today. So here we go. It's only a minute long, so.
We are now deeply concerned by reports of military movements taken by the Russian Federation inside of Ukraine. Russia has a historic relationship with Ukraine, including cultural and economic ties, and a military facility in Crimea. But any violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity would be deeply destabilizing, which is not in the interest of Ukraine, Russia, or Europe. It would represent a profound interference in matters that must be determined by the Ukrainian people. It would be a clear violation of Russia's commitment to respect the independence and sovereignty and borders of Ukraine and of international laws. And just days after the world came to Russia for the Olympic Games, it would invite the condemnation of nations around the world. And indeed, the United States will stand with the international community in affirming that there will be costs for any military intervention in Ukraine.
I've seen that. So what I did is I go over here and I go to Judge Report. If I can type here. And that of course is one of the top ones right up on right above where it says Judge Report. It has Obama warns Russia. But then up in the top left-hand corner, it says Putin in control. And, this is from Heritage, H-A-A-R-E-T-Z. It says, On Ukraine, Putin holds all the cards and dictates the timetable. If Russia invades Ukraine, the timing may be determined by the situation on the ground in Moscow more than the streets of Kyiv and Simferopol. When will we know the Russians have invaded Ukraine? We won't. Unlike the summer of 2008 when paratroop brigades crossed the border into Georgia's sovereign territory under the pretext of aiding the Ossetian minority, Marines of the Russian Black Sea Fleet are already stationed on Ukraine soil. The agreement between the two countries not only allows warships to be based at the port of Sevastopol, but also for Russian military vehicles to traverse the Crimean Peninsula. Acting President Oleksandr, I can't pronounce this, did call upon the Kremlin not to allow its forces to leave the naval base, but an armored convoy had already traveled to the 80 kilometer between Sevastopol and the regional capital Simferopol, stopping outside the town at a traffic police checkpoint. As it is, the Russians do not recognize Chernykov and his intern government. With perfect timing, Russian television broadcast Thursday morning the first statement by deposed President Viktor Yanukovych. Since he fled Kyiv last weekend, the mystery of his whereabouts is over. He succeeded somehow in crossing over to Russia, which has given him sanctuary, and from there he is questioning the legitimacy of those who currently barely hold power. Oh, my eyes are hurting and I barely speak now. I don't know exactly what's going on. You know, I've seen the reports that there's a ship docked in Cuba 200 miles off the coast. You got Obama warning Russia, which, even though Obama is a tyrant over its own people and less fortunate, when you start messing with another world power like Russia, like you're the, king shit, I think you start really pushing the line there. Definitely with someone like Obama, because of course I don't believe he's fit to lead military at all. I think he's pitting the country in a bad position by taking that type of tone. Not saying that Russia should involve itself, but, well, isn't the EU and the US involving themselves just as much? It's hypocritical talk. But here's another one from Pigmine 5. Pro-Russians rally outside official buildings in Crimea or whatever they call it.
We have only one wish. We want to live in peace in our land, in our country, and we don't want to feel pressure from some radical extremists from the western part of Ukraine. It is true that we are different ethnically, we have different language, and we are trying to maintain good coexistence together with them, but they force us to follow their crazy ideas, which they followed always for many centuries. We are not nationalists. We want to live in peace.
We want to make control of situation here in our territory without violence. We need a peace. And we are not agree with the position of power in Ukraine, because we are not agree. It's not legal. We think we didn't choose that power.
Now, I have one problem with them calling, the other side nationalist. They're not nationalists. If they want to basically, go towards the EU, what will happen there? Well, the EU is going to eat them up and make them part of the EU government. Therefore, unelected people are going to be running your country. That does not sound nationalist to me. They might not be pro-Russian, but pro-Russian ones aren't exactly nationalist either. Maybe there needs to be a little bit of national spirit where they at least say that, listen, we're Ukraine, free people, independent individuals. How about this? No government to dictate any personal way of living. How about we try that in America? I think that's what we've been trying to do. And it's like watching a revolution happen, and they're like, I need these people to dictate over our country, not someone to dictate over their country, a foreign entity to dictate over their country. Is that not worse? Are we not moving in the opposite direction than we should be moving? Shouldn't be like, hey, let's not have anybody rule over us. I guess that evolution of thinking has failed to happen yet. When you look at EU, you see how it fails, like it's basically going to do, and the smart people that are pushing it are going to gain from it, and the puppets that are pushing it don't know what they're doing, and eventually they'll be next. Because those elitists, world elitists, will eat them up too. When they're done with everybody else, they have to fight someone. They always say, well, you always have to have someone for them to fight, and I don't believe that. Unless you're an evil person. The only time you have any type of justification is defending your rights. But the evil people are the ones that start the fights. They're the ones that create the situations. Because they know better, and they already have the solution. And it just becomes a revolving cycle. And how many revolutions do countries have to have? How many revolutions do we have to see throughout the world before someone goes, hey, one thing that we haven't tried for thousands and thousands of years successfully? Something that we haven't actually tried. It's happened successfully because of collapses of government. But you know what we've never actually tried? Let's try no government. Oh, that's a revolutionary idea right there. actually try no government. Now you've seen, tribes and, you've seen collectives of, indigenous people that have actually lived without government. And people go, well, they got a chief. And you're like, it's an old guy that can't do anything, and he's not really bossing anybody around. He's just kind of like that old guy that people go to and try to seek knowledge from. That's not the same as a dictator or a tyrant. People take wisdom. Some people don't take the wisdom, and depending on if he's right or wrong, whether they suffer from not taking wisdom. And some people take wisdom and don't think for themselves, and it's bad wisdom. It's one of those things that it makes it really important that you as an individual think for themselves, because even though you might seek wisdom from someone, they're not always going to be right. No one's perfect. And that's where your ability to question and research comes into play. Your ability as an individual to think, hey, this might not be exactly right. Might be on the right path, but might not be exactly right. You start researching, well, he was right about this, but this I'm not sure about. Well, guess what? You're free thinking. It's not that hard. And I'm always like, why do people always want to make it out to be so difficult, so confusing? And I think it comes from people wanting to feel like they are extremely smart. So the more complicated they can make it sound, the smarter they think they sound. Just like when you look at legislation that's passed. Well, you have to have that many bills to etch out, because our jobs are so difficult that we need the, stacks and stacks of paperwork to get a bill passed. In reality, if they were passing honest bills, they would need maybe one piece of paper, maybe a paragraph. But what they're doing is they're spending money, they're taxing money, and they're claiming control over a part of your life. And that takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of paperwork. But you know what happens? They leave a paper trail of their tyranny. If the future is going to be a bright one, then we'll have the paper trail that will make sure that the history books have the facts about the tyrants that were in charge of the modern day. They lied on tape. They did it about Benghazi. It was a video on YouTube that has no actual views on it. That's what did it. And they keep saying it. Even after the documents are released. Well, now we have you lying before documents released. You lie after. Let the history books show that. But the only way the history books are going to show that is if you're writing the history books. The only way they're going to show that is if you make sure that that's not part of history that is covered up. make sure those are not the books that become kindle for a fire. Things like broadcast on, here, on UCY. Download those, put those on a thumb drive, stick them in a safe. Things like that, they might delete, go on YouTube, go like, okay, government said, because, I heard, the Google executives and, well, if the government says, then, yeah, we're gonna do, basically is what it came down to. So, if the government says, well, these people are extremists, take down their material, Google's gonna do it. They will take down the material. There was some, interview, and I was finally able to catch all of it because I kind of just watched clips of it at a time doing other things. But it was Google executives, and they talked to Glenn Beck, and, I was about to say Mark Levin or someone. I knew it was one of those, people. But, which, actually, I think Glenn Beck and the Blaze has actually been doing quite a bit of good work, but, doesn't mean I always agree with them on things. But, the way the Google executives talk, they said that material that might, turn people into extremists, that should be watered down. We basically trying to walk around the wording of saying that we should censor things that might turn people to extremists. Because everybody, believes we shouldn't have extremists out there, homegrown terrorism. But what usually spawns that? Well, what usually spawns that is a revolution caused by a government that has gotten out of control and people are fed up. Therefore, what would cause that? Information that exposes government's fraud. That could lead to homegrown terrorism. The way that government defines it. They called the founding fathers terrorists. That's the mindset of these people. And if you guys can find it, I don't know if they're going, I don't remember if it was on Glenn Beck's YouTube channel or someone else's. If it was on someone else's, it'll probably get taken down, but, if you can find that interview with the Google executives, you gotta listen to these two guys and how they walk around wording, and they have it's almost like an unknowing evilness to them because they believe that they are basically soldiers of good. And they don't recognize that as a opinion, not a fact. They look at, well, we are good people. That's a fact. Well, maybe for your life, but that doesn't mean that, your way of thinking, your way of, living should be pushed upon another person. That doesn't make you a good person. That makes you a tyrant. The evil type of, ideology. It's almost like I don't even know how to put it. But it's not that these people are like evil intentions. It's that their ideology leads to evil ends. And that's probably the worst ones. because it's almost like their ethics line is pushed way beyond what the majority of the people would view appropriate. And it can really become a bad situation. I really think it could, with what Google's working on and the people that work at Google are working on, these are kind of almost pretty scary people. Okay. I wasn't able to find the one video I wanted to find, but, I did have another one here. And this one is FDA approved risky drug against panel's advice. And I'm not sure. This is coming from Next News Network, so usually they might have something else tagged to the, they talk about after that part or before. Usually they don't have one subject on one video. They put multiple subjects and articles on it. So here we go. Maybe. Here we go.
If you're looking for the new painkiller Zohydro, you won't find it, at least not yet. The potent drug hadn't even made it to pharmacy shelves when a firestorm of protest erupted among doctors and activists. They fear the drug will lead to abuse, addiction, and deaths. What's highly noteworthy is the Food and Drug Administration approved the drug against the advice of its advisory panel. The FDA thought a stronger pain pill was needed for patients who've been unable to get relief from existing medications. Despite the controversy, Zohydro is still expected to be available March 1st.
When 16-year-old Amber Christian died inside a Chevrolet Cobalt in July of 2005, the airbag failed to go off. It's the first known death linked to General Motors' faulty ignition recall involving 1.5 million GM cars. While police said the teen had been drinking, this glitch evidently caused the airbag mechanism on her Cobalt to fail. GM was made aware of the problem and allegedly dragged its feet. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration also was informed. The defect has been linked to 13 deaths and 31 crashes. Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey, a longtime auto safety advocate on Capitol Hill, says the Safety Administration fell down on the job and needs to make changes. Wissam Akiki was ordained as a Maronite Catholic priest in Missouri yesterday. But what's interesting here is that the supporters who showed up to celebrate included his wife and daughter. Akiki's entry into the priesthood marks the first time in a century that the Maronite Catholic Church has ordained a married priest. The ceremony was held at St. Raymond's Maronite Cathedral near downtown St. Louis. Maronites are among more than a dozen Eastern Catholic church groups in the United States. Eastern Catholics accept the authority of the Pope. However, they practice many of their own rituals.
An increase in veterans' benefits bit the dust during a Senate session on Thursday. The bill, which would have provided $21 billion for medical, education, and job training benefits for the nation's veterans, fell victim to election year feuds over spending and fresh penalties against Iran. Each party says it values the allegiance of the country's 22 million veterans and their families. But political gamemanship ruled that day. Republicans used a procedural move to block the bill after Senate Veterans Affairs Committee Chairman Bernie Sanders scolded GOP lawmakers about their priorities. Sanders, a Vermont independent, noted, "I have a hard time understanding how anyone could vote for tax breaks for billionaires, for millionaires, for large corporations, and then say we don't have the resources to protect our veterans." Palm Beach County officials say the Federal Emergency Management Agency is flooding them with nonsense. The local officials hope to prevent FEMA from forcing entire sections of the county into zones that would require flood insurance. That includes communities which have never before been placed in such a zone. Besides, local officials say the drainage in Palm Beach County has improved and already keeps many people safe from floods, even from 100-year floods. FEMA gave Palm Beach County until today to gather evidence with which to challenge early maps that consigned many areas into mandatory flood insurance zones. The county planned to send FEMA a letter today which outlines the county's drainage work. That work is said to be sufficient and does not necessarily require a FEMA zoning plan. On Wednesday, a South Florida man was found guilty of ripping off shipping companies through fraudulent accounts. 43-year-old Rogerio Scotton was also found guilty of lying to the Federal Department of Homeland Security about his marriage to a Cuban national. The professional race car driver acted in his own defense in the case, but that strategy failed to sway jurors in Fort Lauderdale's federal court. Prosecutors say that Scotton pretended to be an authorized representative of major companies such as Walmart and Amazon. His Boca Raton-based online business sold electronic goods to Brazil and used phony UPS, FedEx, and DHL accounts to ship customers' purchases to his native Brazil at no cost to himself. Scotton's sentencing has not yet been determined.
When young Joseph McGowan felt his vehicle collide with something on November 3rd of 2010, he said he thought it was some kind of debris, so he didn't stop to look. That was a mistake. Much to his dismay, the debris along Interstate 595 turned out to be a pedestrian. Judges with the 4th District Court of Appeals met yesterday at the Broward Courthouse to hear oral arguments in the case. They're trying to determine whether McGowan's 2012 conviction for leaving the scene of a fatal accident should be overturned. If the appeals court rules in his favor, the 26-year-old plantation resident will be spared 8 years of probation and 400 hours of community service. In May of 2012, a Broward Circuit judge sentenced him to 2 years of house arrest. That time has largely been served. Many are saying this latest case proves the Broward County's drug court works. 40-year-old Michael Clancy turned his life around and saved another's life in the process. The drug court graduate was one of 4 men who lifted an overturned car to free 27-year-old Fenice Lewis. She had flipped her 1999 Honda Prelude into a mucky ditch along Interstate 95 in Fort Lauderdale on Labor Day of 2013. 2 years earlier, Clancy had been arrested on cocaine possession charges. The arrest was his 21st since 1993 and his 12th on drug-related charges. He would later say, after being in the state prison system several times, "I just got sick and tired of being sick and tired." Yesterday, Broward County's drug court program honored him and graduated more than 175 others at the Central Courthouse.
Well, good for him for turning his life around. One thing I want to talk about is Cobalt and the other GM vehicles that the key turning off thing. Part of that's due to a lot of people having too many keys on their keychain, or one of the real common ones are those lanyards that you can put around your neck. They'll have those on their keychain, and I know someone that drives a GM. Theirs isn't a recalled one, but he's turned off his car before, and it was because he had a lanyard and it got tangled up turning, and he turned off his car. But they said that they were aware of the problem, and I think I'm not 100% positive, but I'm pretty sure they said all the way back in like 2009, somewhere in between 2008 and 2010 they knew about it. But wasn't GM basically kind of bailed out by the government and under government control, and government oversight. They really wanted to make sure the company had success. That way they can get their money back. And I think that, wonder, maybe if there was another reasoning behind the suppression. Who knows? We'll probably never find out. But there's a lot of different things with those ignitions. They put them in the dash anymore, and on a lot of GMs where they put them, if you have something hanging on them, and your knees hitting them, got a lanyard hanging and your knees hitting it, you might have problems. So it's one of those things that it's a sketchy thing for me. There could be a lot more liable. I seen pictures of the Cobalt that the young girl was driving, and she had the furry stuff everywhere, and I kind of assume that she probably also had a whole bunch of crap on her keychain. I think my keychain has too much on it, and then I look at other people and I'm like, are you serious? It's not surprising that it might turn off your car. You have that much stuff dangling from it and the key's in a weird position. That's a lot of weight on that keychain. It probably would turn off the ignition if the ignition wasn't a real tight one. That's one thing I see that could be a problem. I see people that have had that problem and have fixed it by lightening up their keychain a little bit, taking real dangly stuff off their keychain. It definitely might help out some of those situations, but of course recalls, and they're getting that all done. I think the media is going to push for something else, so, it just seems to be what the media likes to do. And, this one's coming from We Are Change. NSA whistleblower was witness to, 9/11, foreknowledge. And I thought this might be interesting to listen to, so I thought maybe the audience out there might want to hear this too, so we'll see what this gives us. Of course, there's probably a commercial. Luckily, most of the commercials you can skip, so it's not too bad. Here we go. Maybe. It's going to play with my emotions again. Let's try this one more time here. I hope I don't have to close my browser again. It doesn't matter what browser I use, it's been having this problem. I don't know what it is. Okay, we're just going to have to do this here. Okay. I'm not sure who this NSA whistleblower is. Looks like my firewall might have been blocking it. We'll see here. My firewall can be sensitive at times.
Mr. Drake, you have a very impressive resume. You were the senior executive at the NSA. You were indicted, and most importantly, you're a whistleblower. And I think one of the most important things you said here on stage and you whistleblowed upon was about 9/11. Can you tell us the specifics about the information that you found out about 9/11 when you were working at the NSA?
Well, one, it was a systemic intelligence failure. And NSA conveniently hid behind the CIA and FBI during the 9/11 Commission hearings, which was the independent commission, after the Congress had looked into it, 2 different investigations. And even they later said, some of the commissioners acknowledged that they were unable to get full cooperation from NSA, and there's still critically troubling questions that had never been answered.
There's a lot of...
So I ended up, see, this is just in the early days after I discovered, myself as well as with others who came to me in private, the NSA had critical intelligence about Al-Qaeda and associated movements in particular that had never been properly shared outside of NSA. And in part, it was an institutional prerogative where, because counterterrorism was not a national priority, to say it that way, even though Tenet had said in 1990 the system was blinking red, they simply did not share critical intelligence. And because, although they had it, and so because of that, guess what? And that includes critical intelligence about some of the hijackers.
A lot of information came out about foreknowledge that the U.S. government had. Now, you're telling me that the NSA had foreknowledge and critical information that, if would have been shared, could have prevented the 9/11 attack?
Yes, I've said that actually for quite some time now. There was an open letter, an open memo to the president that myself and my fellow whistleblowers published through Consortium News, and it got picked up by a number of other outlets. And in there, I actually detail, it's in quotes, I detail what the nature of that intelligence was.
Wow, that is incredible. Now, I know for speaking out, the government has gone after you. A lot of people in the mainstream media and the government are saying, with the Edward Snowden situation, that if Edward Snowden would have went through the proper chain of command, everything would have been fine. What is your response, and can you tell us about your story going to the chain of command?
Well, I'm exhibit number 1, and why going through the chain of command and through all proper channels as a whistleblower, even invoking the very statute that was supposed to protect you, called the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act of 1998, simply and utterly failed. In fact, it was an exposure act. It's not a disclosure channel. All of my whistleblowing within the chain of command at NSA, within the Department of Defense, and with Congress and yet others, right, all came to naught. Because the grave nature of the disclosures went right up to and including the White House in the Bush administration. So why would they be acknowledging that they were in violation of the Constitution, which the President himself has a very special oath to preserve, protect, and defend? Right? I just have to support and defend it. He has to preserve, protect, and defend. Right? So why would they acknowledge that? Because they knew they were in violation of the law. They knew they were in violation of in partnership with the NSA. The NSA, by turning the United States of America into the equivalent of a foreign nation, then they're violating, with criminal sanctions, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978, which has been modified 5 times up until 9/11 to keep up with technology.
The mainstream media is giving a lot of attention to Edward Snowden. They haven't given you that much media attention at all. But I know what you did in the past, it was extremely heroic, extremely brave. I know now that you also talked with Edward Snowden. Can you talk about some of the things you talked to him and about your meeting with him?
Well, it was an extraordinary moment. I mean, he's acknowledged that he was inspired by me. He saw what I had gone through in terms of working the channels. He knew there was no hope at all working with the channels. Those were entirely corrupted. He also obviously had access to information of an extraordinary nature that fully documented what many of us have been saying for many, many years prior. All I have to do is go back to my March 15th Sunshine Week speech at the National Press Club. Many people are now going back to that and saying, wait a minute. We had people within the system, people that came out of the system, people that paid extraordinarily high prices for having held up a mirror to secret power and secret government. A government, by the way, that has no inclination to follow the Constitution because it separated itself from that extraordinary document. They came into being over 220 years ago. So all of this took place after 9/11, although there's a lot of things that were being put into place prior to 9/11. So Edward Snowden, a magnificent, extraordinary act of civil disobedience, said, you know what, enough's enough. The overwhelming preponderance of the evidence was this thing had so metastasized in the intervening 12 years that I'm going to go to reporters and journalists who I know and just blow it wide open.
His story is very inspiring. Your story is very inspiring. It inspired me to confront General Hayden. But it's pretty clear that with everything that's happening with Snowden, with the information that you came out with, that we're pretty much in an information war. Now,
actually, yes, it's important. Very few people are still getting that. It is an information war. See, information is power. Information is the coin of the realm. And the government has decided in the internet age that the way to control it is to own it. Hayden actually said this well over a decade ago, that we have to own the net. Own the net. I don't think people fully appreciated what that meant. It was sort of a way in which he was flagging that we're going to do everything we can to gain access to as much data as possible, because we're in the steal the secrets business. Now, we're even including stealing anything we get our hands on. Doesn't matter whether it's protected or not. If we can get away with it, hey, and not get caught. I mean, Hayden is an absolute violation as a military officer who had taken an oath as a military officer and the head of NSA, and then later that he was the the deputy director of the DNI. He was also the head of the CIA. Absolute violation of the oath to support and defend the Constitution. But in his moral rectitude, he said, I could not do it. This is like triple negative, which meant when given the opportunity to exceed his authorities unconstitutionally, he said, you know what? I'm going to do it for the sake of the nation, in secret.
It's very brave, but one thing I never thought I would ask someone who worked at the NSA before, this question, but how do we fight this information war?
Well, information wants to be free. And I've called for maximum exposure and disclosure. This has gone too far. The limits in which even executive branch executive orders are supposed to constrain even the secret side. All the oversight mechanisms have utterly failed. You only have a couple of people like Udall and the Wydens of the world and one or two others. More now because of the disclosures who've been saying for years. They just weren't willing to go into the well of the Senate under the speech and debate clause and just speak the truth, because they knew if they did, they'd be sanctioned, and probably they would be removed from their positions. They would remain as senators, but they were removed from their positions on the intel committees, the very bodies they're supposed to oversee the secret side of the government, because of significant and ongoing and decades-long violations back during the 50s and 60s and 70s.
Mr. Drake, you're my hero. Thank you so much.
And he brought up things that, it has to be exposed. Full disclosure of what's going on. And now, we see them trying to, amp up the, NSA. They really just want to go forward. And I think that itself is extreme exposure. That's showing that they have absolutely no regard of the, the outrage that people have over what the NSA is doing. They have no regard. And that should in itself be enough to say, screw this. We're not going to take it. And, the hackers out there, the people out there that are creating, those tools to try to counteract it, they're not stopping, every time that, something that they create is defeated, they create something new, and it's an ongoing battle. And I think the freedom of information through some of these means are going to be essential for freedom to exist in any manner. They, just like I was talking about earlier with YouTube and Google, again, find the interviews, what they were saying to Glenn Beck, and you're never mind Glenn Beck. Listen to what the Google executives are saying. And you listen to their wording and everything they're saying when it comes to, well, you need to water down, or, basically what it comes down to is censor anything that might create homegrown terrorism, which basically means anything that exposes a truth that might outrage someone. Basically, they want a submissive population. And they're not looking at it in that way. That's the problem. Their ideology is so messed up that they're looking at it in a way that we're helping people, and they really believe this. They think that people just get upset about the littlest things type attitude. And, you know, when these hackers and these programmers out there are creating different backdoors that allow you to get information, it's going to probably be one of the essential tools of the freedom of flow of information between people. I really need to get some people on here to really start talking about alternative internets and networks and different ways of sharing information. If the internet keeps getting locked down and you have companies like Google that own so much of the internet anymore, it's getting ridiculous. It's something that we have to try to look at alternatives, and I don't think alternatives are going to last forever on the internet as we know it. I think more software, more technology similar to the Tor network is going to pop up. Maybe some type of satellite connections or some type of signal that's encrypted. You never know. Technology is growing at a tremendous speed. And sad thing is, I think there's other countries that could surpass us in technology if we don't watch out. I think luckily we do have a pretty good size community of hackers out there that are trying to, you know, do what's right and, you know, allow people to share information like they should. But we also have to keep trying to, raise a fuss and be very vocal when they try to pass laws to destroy the internet as we know it. Try to defend what we do have, what freedom we do have on the internet. We have to try to stay vigilant on things like that, because we are on the verge of losing the internet and the ability to share things. We already see it with Facebook. We already see it with Google search, pushing trends down on Twitter. There's a lot of different things that you see these bigger companies do. And a lot of these companies that start off, they're decent companies, and then one of the bigger companies buys them out and they go to crap. There's a few of them that I use, and it's like, are you serious? I had no problems before, and you go sell your company, and now it's crap. And you have to wonder why. Why was a small company able to run it so successfully without this many glitches? And now that these bigger companies with billions of dollars can't seem to get it to run right. That's what makes people go, well, they're probably trying to censor. Or they're probably trying to spy on us. There's probably a backdoor built in now that allows the NSA to spy on us. And, you know, all of those have been confirmed. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Stay tuned for Boiler Room with Jim Funke. Have a great weekend. Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Take care.